The Plaza Hotel's grand ballroom shimmered under the weight of chandeliers and wealth, buzzing with the sharp laughter of New York's most elite. I stood near the bar, sipping sparkling water, blending into the background like always. My plain, black blazer, deceptively simple, hid the subtle detailing of a $6,000 Brunello Cucinelli cut. No one here would guess I was anything but the family's black sheep, the daughter who never quite found her place. I wore that invisibility like armor, especially tonight. It was my father's 65th birthday, a night carefully orchestrated to celebrate his legacy, his success, and the two children who had followed in his footsteps. In other words, not me. Still playing around with your little startup, Rachel? My sister Catherine's voice slid into my ear like a blade dipped in honey. Her diamond bracelet flashed under the ballroom's gold light as she gave me her usual condescending smile. Though I suppose someone has to be the cautionary tale in the family. Keeps the rest of us humble. I smiled, sipped my drink, and said nothing. If she only knew that her prestigious luxury consulting firm, the one she bragged about endlessly, was now owned quietly and completely by one of my holding companies, while they laughed at what they believed was my failing tech business. I had been building a $17 billion empire under their noses. My company, Artemis Ventures, had remained hidden, my role carefully disguised. Tonight, all that was going to change. My phone buzzed gently in my clutch. A message from my chief legal officer. Merger documents finalized. Williams & Co. Acquisition complete. Public announcement scheduled for 9:00 p.m. I glanced at the ballroom's ornate grandfather clock. 8:15 p.m. in exactly 45 minutes, my entire family and the financial elite gathered to honor my father would learn the truth. The daughter they pitied had just acquired the company they worshipped. Rachel, my brother Michael's booming voice carried across the room. At least pretend to network. Although, I suppose no one's here to hear about your, what do you call it again, tech thing? He chuckled as if it were all so amusing. I smiled thinly. The irony was delicious. His investment division had recently tripled its returns, all thanks to the algorithmic platform my company had licensed to his bank under a different name, of course. Every smart move he bragged about had originated from my code. Just observing, I replied simply, watching him adjust the cufflinks on his tailored suit. He didn't know that the boutique hedge fund he worked at had been acquired by Artemis 6 months ago, nor that the Armani suit he wore had likely been paid for by a quarterly bonus funded through my back-end technology. Through the arched windows of the ballroom, I could see my father laughing at the head table, surrounded by board members and Wall Street veterans, probably telling another story about how his son and eldest daughter were carrying on the Williams legacy, while I played around in startup land. Miss Williams, a server leaned in discreetly. Except she wasn't a server, she was my Chief Strategy Officer, disguised in uniform. Everything is prepared. Press releases, merger slides, and digital signage. We're ready for the 9:00 drop. I nodded once. Perfect. At 8:30 p.m., the ballroom buzzed with even more energy. The waitstaff, half of them actually my executive protection team, began topping off champagne glasses. Guests laughed and traded war stories of the market. The massive LED screens mounted high on the walls displayed live stock tickers. My father had insisted on that touch. Let the numbers speak for themselves, he'd said. Indeed, I intended for them to. There's my dreamer daughter, my mother called sweetly, voice loud enough to carry through the noise. She approached with a tense smile. Rachel, couldn't you at least have worn the suit I sent you? The Goldman Sachs partners are here tonight. I'm comfortable as I am, I said evenly, taking my place at the edge of the family photo lineup. As always, just out of frame. Ever since I'd refused to join the family firm 10 years ago, I'd been quietly shuffled to the sidelines. The forgotten daughter. 8:55 p.m. The MC, hired for the evening, stepped onto the stage with a microphone in hand. Ladies and gentlemen, he called out, our host has a very special market announcement prepared for this evening. Please direct your attention to the screens for a live update from Wall Street. My father, raising his glass for a toast, smiled as if he knew exactly what was about to appear. He did not. The LED screens flickered, then flashed red. Breaking news. Artemis Ventures acquires Williams & Co. CEO of Artemis revealed as Rachel Williams. $17 billion deal shocks Wall Street. The room fell into a stunned silence. Glasses hovered in midair. Gasps rippled through the crowd like static. My father's champagne flute stopped halfway to his lips as he stared at the screen, frozen. I could see the disbelief morph into confusion, then horror. I stepped forward from the shadows, heels clicking like thunder against the marble floor. "Dad," I said softly, but clearly, "I believe we need to discuss the new direction of the company." The ballroom, once filled with laughter and polite clinking of glasses, now sat in stunned silence. All eyes were glued to the massive LED screens flashing the words that shattered every illusion. Rachel Williams revealed as CEO of Artemis Ventures. Williams & Co. acquired an historic $17 billion deal. My father, still frozen in mid-toast, slowly lowered his glass. The smile on his face had vanished, replaced by a pale, confused rigidity, as if the room around him had suddenly become unfamiliar. My sister Catherine's jaw hung slightly open, her diamond clutch slipping just an inch in her hand. Michael looked as though someone had knocked the breath from his lungs. I walked toward the stage calmly, each step deliberate, heels clicking with quiet finality. The silence broke only as whispers rippled through the crowd like a spreading fire. Business magnates, bankers, reporters, and family friends all stared, their brains catching up with what they had just read. The nobody daughter had just acquired one of the oldest family-run financial institutions in Manhattan. "I believe we need to talk," I said, now standing in the spotlight beside my stunned father. "About what happens when you mistake someone's silence for failure." Before he could speak, the screens updated again. More headlines scrolled by like courtroom evidence. Artemis Ventures secretly acquired 23 companies under shell corporations. Rachel Williams, from family disgrace to fintech powerhouse. Wall Street reels as Artemis reveals 40% infrastructure control. Michael broke the silence, his voice dry and cracking. This can't be real. Artemis designed my trading platform. They power most of my firm's analytics." He looked at me, stunned. "That was you?" I nodded. "The very same algorithms you brag about every Sunday dinner? Built by my team, licensed to your firm. The performance bonuses you've collected? My tech made them possible." I stepped closer, my voice calm. "Remember when I showed you early drafts of the algorithm and you called it amateur? I guess the amateur's doing all right." My security detail, previously disguised as servers and bartenders, subtly moved into new positions around the room. Not threatening, just reinforcing what was already clear. This was no accident. This was a coup dressed in elegance. "For those just joining us," I said, turning to address the crowd, "I'm Rachel Williams, founder and CEO of Artemis Ventures. We're the ones behind the AI systems used by 4 of the top 10 hedge funds, the ones who pioneered quantum-assisted trading. And as of 9:00 p.m., we are the new owners of Williams & Co." Catherine finally found her voice. "But how? You've always said you were struggling. You live in Brooklyn." I smiled. "Yes, I live in a building I own, under a different name. Actually, I own most of that block. While you were flaunting second homes in the Hamptons, I was acquiring technology startups, one by one, funding them with profits you all thought I didn't have. Playing broke was a better disguise than I ever expected." The screens flashed again, now showing a portfolio of companies, AI firms, blockchain infrastructure, cybersecurity operations, investment tools. The room gasped as familiar brands appeared, companies thought to be unconnected, now revealed as subsidiaries of Artemis Ventures. "Catherine," I continued, "your consulting firm's market insight tool, the one you thought you developed internally, built by my people. Every trend forecast you sold to luxury clients was generated by our system. I even paid you bonuses for years through a dummy company just to keep you from noticing." Michael stepped forward, eyes narrowing. "What about my AI system, the one I launched last year?" "That was Artemis version 3.2, licensed through a silent partner firm I own." "You're welcome." I turned to the screens. "And your revolutionary trading protocol? That was developed by my lead engineer who also used to be my roommate." "But you never remembered her name." My father finally spoke. His voice wavered with disbelief and anger. "You've been lying to us all these years." "Hiding?" "No," I said firmly. "I gave you exactly what you expected. A struggling, stubborn daughter with a laptop. And you believed it. You never bothered to ask more, to look closer. Every time I tried to show you something, you shut me down." The MC looked around nervously, unsure whether to intervene, but the room was wrapped. The screens updated again. Williams & Co. Restructuring under Artemis begins immediately. Rachel Williams, from ignored innovator to Wall Street's future. My chief strategy officer, formerly dressed as a cocktail waitress, handed out sleek leather folders to board members and executives in the room. Inside were the new org charts, digital transformation timelines, and job consolidation plans. You're terminating people? My father whispered. Not people. Inefficiency, I corrected. Artemis AI systems will automate most of your operations within 90 days. Those executives who mocked automation, they're being replaced by it. Some of them already have been. They just haven't realized it yet. Michael looked like he might faint. You're tearing everything down. No, I replied coolly. I'm rebuilding it the right way. Williams & Co. was stuck in a past that refuses to acknowledge the future. I offered you my ideas once. You dismissed them. So I created my own empire and bought yours instead. The final screen update sent a fresh shockwave. Rachel Williams appointed CEO and chairwoman of Artemis Global. Williams & Co. brand to be retired. Financial titans replaced by AI leadership. I looked at the crowd, so many familiar faces who had chuckled at my startup tales over dinners and fundraisers. Their eyes now held fear, awe, and a little respect. I straightened my blazer and glanced at my father one last time. Your legacy ends tonight, Dad. Mine just began. Gasps echoed through the ballroom as the Artemis Ventures logo replaced every trace of Williams & Co. branding on the massive digital screens. The gold-etched family crest that once symbolized our financial dynasty flickered out, swallowed by the sleek midnight blue insignia of my empire. I stood center stage, the spotlight, now fully mine, as the press began to realize this wasn't just a birthday party, it was the hostile takeover of the century. Reporters scrambled to text their editors. Phones lit up across the room. A Forbes journalist visibly mouthed, "Unbelievable," as she snapped a photo of me standing beside my father's now vacant podium. I raised my hand, and the noise quieted. Let me clarify a few things before we proceed, I said, my voice steady. Artemis Ventures did not buy Williams & Co. to preserve the past. We acquired it to redefine the future. The screens behind me shifted again, this time showing a side-by-side comparison of old Williams banking metrics versus Artemis AI performance forecasts. Our systems will streamline 82% of current processes, I explained. Our predictive algorithms are 93% more accurate than your trading desks. And unlike your board, I added with a pointed glance at Michael, they don't gamble millions on gut feelings. Michael's mouth opened, then shut again. His usual self-assured smirk had vanished. I could practically see him calculating what this meant for his title, his office, his six-figure bonuses built entirely on tech he never bothered to understand. He turned to our mother, who stood frozen near the front row, clutching her empty champagne glass like it could anchor her to the old world. Darling, she finally managed, voice brittle, surely you'll keep some of the family involved. I turned to her, eyes cool. In what capacity? Catherine as a social media strategist? Michael as an intern in our AI ethics division? Or Dad? Perhaps he'd prefer the advisory board for nostalgia's sake. A wave of uncomfortable laughter rippled through the audience, unsure whether it was safe to react. I let the moment hang, then continued. Make no mistake, Artemis is not a charity. We're a precision machine built from vision, innovation, and relentless execution. I invited you all here tonight not to destroy a legacy but to demonstrate who now owns it. My COO, no longer disguised, approached with a silver tray of slim tablets. New contracts, she said smoothly, for the remaining executives. Those who wish to stay must reapply under Artemis Global terms. The deadline is midnight. My father finally found his voice. You're humiliating us. No, I corrected. I'm educating you on what it feels like to be underestimated, dismissed, laughed at while you quietly build the infrastructure of a new world underneath their feet. A murmur of agreement rose from unexpected corners. The younger entrepreneurs in the crowd looked at me like a symbol. Several even clapped. Quietly, the screens flickered again. This time, the news was personal. Rachel Williams purchases family estate in upstate New York. Former Williams home to become Artemis Leadership Academy. My mother gasped. That house has been in our family for generations. Yes, I said calmly. And now it will help train future leaders, ones whose ideas won't be ridiculed at dinner tables. Catherine, desperate to regain some dignity, stepped forward. Rachel, I'm sure we can come to some kind of arrangement. After all, you built this with our DNA, our connections, our correction, I said sharply. I built this because you refused to believe I could. Every investor I convinced, every patent I filed, every sleepless night coding in that tiny Brooklyn apartment you all mocked, it was all driven by your refusal to see me. She flinched, but I didn't stop. The Artemis Quantum Suite, the one that just replaced your consulting models? I wrote its first version while you were honeymooning in Mykonos. You said I couldn't be taken seriously in tech, so I built the most serious tech infrastructure in modern finance. Behind me, the final slides rolled onto the screen. Artemis Ventures to launch $20 billion female innovator fund. Rachel Williams ranked youngest self-made Fortune 10 CEO. Legacy crushed. A new order begins. Reporters surged forward now. Cameras flashing. A CNBC anchor tried to shout a question. Miss Williams, why tonight? Why reveal this here? I smiled. Because for years, this family held court over me in rooms just like this. They dictated who belonged at the table. Tonight, I'm not asking to sit at the table. I'm building a new one. My father stumbled back into his chair, shell-shocked. The man who once told me, startups are hobbies, not careers, was now watching his own company fold into mine, piece by calculated piece. Michael, pale and sweating, spoke up again. What happens to us now? I took a breath, measured. You'll be offered new roles, stripped of your titles, of course. Salaries adjusted to reflect market contribution, not last names. You can work, learn, adapt, or walk. And if we refuse? The answer was simple. Then Artemis proceeds without you. Cleanly. Silence fell again. The spotlight turned to me once more. And one more thing, I said, raising my voice. As the ballroom hushed, tonight is not about revenge. It's about revelation. For every daughter mocked at the dinner table, every coder laughed out of boardrooms, this moment is for you. I was invisible to them, but I became their future. And with that, I turned from the podium. The weight of every insult and underestimation finally cast off. The ballroom, once a sanctuary of old wealth and outdated pride, now crackled with the unfamiliar energy of disruption. As I stepped down from the podium, murmurs swirled behind me like a rising storm. I could feel the tension, a mix of disbelief, betrayal, and awe. The same room where I was once treated like a forgotten coat check girl was now buzzing with my name. I walked calmly past rows of stunned faces, each one more incredulous than the last. Venture capitalists, hedge fund titans, even government finance regulators, all people who'd once dismissed me, are now scrambling to reframe me in their mental Rolodex. No longer Rachel, the family's failed entrepreneur. Now Rachel Williams, CEO of Artemis Ventures, the woman who had just gutted a century-old financial empire with a smile. I took a seat in the front row, the very seat Catherine had tried to nudge me away from earlier that evening. My assistant offered me a glass of sparkling water, the same one I'd been sipping all night. Only now, it tasted different. It tasted like victory. Miss Williams, said the Goldman Sachs director as he leaned forward, voice now filled with an unmissable deference. If Artemis is considering a realignment of its strategic partners, I'd be very interested in continuing our dialogue. Perhaps over dinner? My lips curved slightly. We'll see, I replied. I'm focused on substance these days, not just legacy logos. Across the room, Catherine was huddled with her remaining staff, her laptop open as she tried to refresh access to her cloud-based analytics platform. I knew the moment her credentials failed, her face went slack, followed by a frantic glance in my direction. I raised my glass in a mock toast. Michael, meanwhile, sat slumped in his chair, typing furiously on his phone, likely calling contacts, trying to preserve what little power he had left. I imagined the moment when he'd realize Artemis now owned 38% of the systems his division relied on. Every text he sent, likely traveling through a network I controlled. And then, my father stood, slowly, like a man waking from a long, comfortable dream into a cold new reality. He walked toward the podium, each step more uncertain than the last. His voice cracked with carefully restrained fury. You've embarrassed this family, he said, scanning the room. You've undermined everything we built. You think this is some kind of victory, Rachel? It's betrayal, treason. No, I replied, rising once more. It's accountability. The crowd turned. The media pressed closer. My father gestured toward the screens that still pulsed with breaking news. Rachel Williams restructures Wall Street. Artemis Ventures signals end of traditional banking. You could have joined us, he hissed. You could have been part of the legacy. I tried, I said plainly. For years, I tried. I brought ideas, proposals, even patents. You dismissed every one of them. You told me I was wasting time, playing. You wanted obedience, not innovation. He opened his mouth to argue, but I didn't let him. Every time you laughed at my code, I said, voice rising with emotion, I was designing the platform that now controls 70% of your business infrastructure. Every time you called my work cute, I was filing patents that redefined algorithmic finance. And when you told me to stop embarrassing the family at networking events, that was the same week I closed Artemis' third billion-dollar acquisition. I paused, allowing the crowd to absorb it. You didn't want a daughter. You wanted a mirror. And when I didn't reflect what you wanted to see, you erased me. His hands trembled at his sides. But the fire in his eyes, the one that had ruled our family for decades, was finally extinguished. The screens updated once more. This time, with something none of them expected. Artemis Education Initiative launches free AI and fintech academies across 50 countries. The headline rolled alongside a brief video montage showing young women coding in labs, diverse classrooms lit by digital displays, and underserved communities receiving cutting-edge training. I didn't build Artemis just to prove something to this room, I said softly. I built it for the girl who's told she's too quiet to lead, the coder who gets laughed out of pitch meetings, the daughter who's only invited to family dinners out of obligation. I built it for the ones like me. I turned to my COO, who stepped forward holding a black leather portfolio. Effective immediately, Artemis will establish a $10 billion fund to invest in underrepresented founders. We will no longer fund inherited power. We will fund potential. Gasps rippled across the room. Catherine muttered something under her breath. My mother looked like she might faint, and as for Williams & Co., I said, locking eyes with my father, it will be rebranded Artemis Global. The name Williams will no longer appear on any building, document, or equity chart. You built a legacy of exclusion. I'm building a future of access. My father fell silent, not because he agreed, but because he knew he'd lost. Not just the company, not just the name, but the illusion of superiority, the belief that titles and tradition would shield them forever. Reporters crowded toward me. Flashbulbs went off. The buzz in the room was deafening. I offered my final statement of the evening. Empires aren't just inherited, I said. They're built, forged in silence, refined in rejection, and one day, unveiled with precision. The screen behind me changed one final time. Rachel Williams, from family joke to industry legend, and with that, I turned away from the podium for the last time. 1 year later, the grand ballroom at the plaza had changed beyond recognition. The gold-plated chandeliers still sparkled, but now their light illuminated a very different kind of gathering. The stiff gray suits had been replaced by sleek touchwear, the conversations buzzing not with stock prices, but with innovation. Gone were the old Wall Street titans who once looked down their noses at me. In their place stood young founders, AI developers, quantum computing pioneers, many of them women and minorities who, like me, had once been laughed out of boardrooms. I stood at center stage, no longer in the shadows. Behind me, the massive digital screens displayed Artemis Ventures' latest achievements. Our AI systems now handled 70% of global financial transactions. Our new Artemis quantum chain had just been adopted by the G7 nations for cross-border settlements. And our most recent valuation had eclipsed $142 billion, making Artemis the most valuable private company in the world. Miss Williams, my AI assistant, projected as a near-perfect hologram, appeared beside me. Shall I begin the annual metrics presentation? I nodded, then turned to face the audience, an audience that now listened to every word I said with the kind of reverence my own family never gave me. Good evening, I began, scanning the room. 1 year ago today, I stood in this very ballroom to reveal the truth, that I, Rachel Williams, the family disappointment, was not just building a company. I was building a revolution. Applause swelled through the crowd, but I held up a hand gently, signaling for quiet. Tonight is not about revenge, I continued. That part's already done. Tonight is about what comes next. The screen behind me flashed with headlines from the past year. Artemis Ventures acquires global banking consortium. Traditional finance transformed by AI. Rachel Williams redefines leadership in tech. The camera panned briefly to the back of the room, where my family now sat not as guests of honor, but as observers. Catherine, no longer clad in designer couture, wore a basic Artemis staff hoodie. She worked in quality assurance now, testing systems she once mocked. Michael, demoted to an internal data entry role, sat silently beside her, staring blankly at his company-issued laptop. And my father, the man who once introduced me as his free spirit child, was now an administrative assistant in one of Artemis's satellite offices. I'd had no intention of humiliating them, but truth, like innovation, is indifferent to ego. Over the last 12 months, I said, Artemis Ventures has launched 17 tech education academies across 5 continents. We've sponsored 12,000 underrepresented entrepreneurs, and we've given grants to hundreds of women who were told they didn't belong in boardrooms. I paused for a moment, then continued, because I remember being that girl, being told my ideas were cute, that my startup was a phase, that I should just marry well and stay out of serious business. Soft laughter rippled through the crowd, laughter of recognition, not mockery. But you know what's funny? I said, smiling. Those same people now work for me. The audience erupted in applause. Even some of the media, seated at the sides, rose to their feet. The screen behind me changed again. Artemis to launch $50 billion fund for mock startups. To those who were laughed at in pitch meetings. To the coders who were told to smile more. To every girl who had to fight for a seat at the table. We're building new tables now. Just then, my COO stepped onto the stage and whispered something in my ear. Perfect timing, I said aloud. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to announce Artemis Ventures' acquisition of Neoquant Global. Gasps filled the room. Neoquant was the last independent AI finance firm left outside Artemis's umbrella. With this deal, we now controlled nearly 80% of global digital finance infrastructure. My voice lowered slightly. And with that, Artemis Ventures officially becomes the most powerful financial tech entity in history, built not from inheritance, but from vision. In the back row, I saw my father shift uncomfortably, his name once spoken with awe. This room was now irrelevant, a relic of a different era. I walked down from the stage and handed him a sealed envelope. Inside is a retirement package, I said softly. Generous, but symbolic. Your name is no longer on anything I build, but you'll be comfortable. He looked up at me with something that almost resembled regret. But I had long since stopped needing his approval. As I returned to the stage, the screens lit up with the night's final announcement. Rachel Williams, world's youngest self-made tech billionaire, launches Artemis Global Fellowship for Disruptive Innovators. The crowd rose to their feet. And remember, I said, voice carrying over the cheers, sometimes the people you laugh at become the ones signing your checks, and the ones you silence become the loudest voices in the room. The ballroom filled with applause once again, this time louder than anything my father had ever received in his decades of dominance. I stood in the center of it all, not out of ego but out of truth. The screens behind me scrolled one final headline: Rachel Williams, the nobody who rebuilt the world. And as I stepped into the spotlight fully, I realized this was never about revenge. It was about revolution.